So we'll start off by taking the vehicle for a short drive to warm up the oil, then pulling into the garage, jacking the front up and setting the vehicle on a pair of jack stands. Now, if you are going to jack your vehicle up, always remember to properly insert and set your vehicle on a pair of jack stands. Next up is to remove the oil drain plug and drain the oil. Now, you can't quite see it here, but it's preferable to drain the oil into an oil drain pan or an old bucket and not all over the floor. You also want to make sure that when you remove the oil drain plug that the old sealing washer comes off. Now go ahead and clean the oil drain plug, remove the old sealing washer and install a new one. Now sometimes it is possible to reuse the old sealing washer, but because they are pretty cheap, best practice is just to go ahead and put on a new one. Once all the oil is drained, go ahead and reinstall the drain plug and tighten it to the correct torque. Now, you may need to consult your service manual to get the specific torque setting for your vehicle, but in this one, I've done this enough times to know how tight to make it by hand. It's also important before screwing the plug back in, and I'll say this again, to make sure that the old sealing washer is not stuck on the sump side of the hole. Sometimes the old washer will get stuck, and if you stack a new washer onto an old washer, you could potentially have a leak. Once the oil drain plug is properly tightened, go ahead and clean the area with some parts cleaner so that it's easy to see any leaks after the test run. To remove the oil filter on this vehicle is pretty tricky. There isn't much working space at all. The filter is on the front of the motor and I was able to get my hand in and loosen it from underneath. I just cracked the filter loose. In fact, this filter was actually very loose to begin with, a little bit too loose. But before removing it, it's a good idea to stick a rag underneath the filter and possibly also slide the oil drain pan underneath. Now, I prefer the vertically mounted filters because these horizontally mounted filters always mess when you pull them off. Now, there isn't much space to video in the gap, but after removing the filter, I tipped it up and pulled it out the top, sort of trying to limit the amount of oil running out and making a mess everywhere. And after the filter is removed, this is how much oil eventually missed. Not great, but not a lot either. Looking from underneath through a small gap, you can see the flange where the oil filter screws onto. Instructions on the filter say to apply a thin film of oil to the surface of the gasket before screwing it on. Hand tighten until the gasket contacts the sealing surface and tighten a further 3/4 turn. It's also good practice to write the date and the mileage on the new filter before installing it. So I'll go ahead and remove the protective plastic and wipe some oil onto the filter gasket. Now, installing the new filter is pretty much the opposite of when it was removed. Stick it in from the top, screw it on and tighten. And once that's done, please don't forget to pour your new oil into your engine. So I'm quickly going to check the owner's manual, and this vehicle has a 2-liter engine and requires 4.5 liters of oil. Now today I'm using a 5W30 oil from the Suzuki spares department, and I've said this many times before, but for sure go shop around for the best price on the parts you require. But I've often found the dealerships to have pretty good pricing. So don't automatically assume that they will be most expensive. At least that's the case for the places I've been to. Next up is to check the oil level, but while we wait for it to run down, I'll start changing out the spark plugs. To access the plugs, the plastic cover on top of the engine needs to be removed. And to do this, I'll first gently pull off the rubber air hose from the front of the air filter housing. Then there are plastic pin type clips at each corner of the engine cover, so I'll just pull up each corner. And each of the spark plugs is under each coil pack. So first, I'll go ahead and unplug each of the coil packs. Each plug has a thumb button that needs to be squeezed to release the plug. Also be careful when removing these. It's preferable not to damage them because if you do, the service gets a whole lot more expensive and a whole lot more frustrating. It's also a good idea to blow the area clean with a bit of compressed air so that nothing falls into the engine when the spark plugs are removed. Next up, I'll crack loose each of the bolts holding the coil packs and then completely remove and set them aside. Once that's done, the coil packs should be loose. Removing the spark plugs should be fairly straightforward, and once they are all loose, you should be able to unscrew and remove them by hand. Now here's a close-up of a plug that came out. Before installing the new plugs, don't forget to check the spark plug gap is set correctly. Another tip when installing the new spark plugs is to thread them in by hand until they bottom out. If it doesn't want to thread in easily enough to do it by hand, please don't force it. Something is likely wrong or cross-threaded. So just remove it, check the thread and try again. Now believe me, you don't want to cross-thread the plugs into the head. Once again, the simple service is going to get a whole lot more expensive and a whole lot more frustrating if you end up doing that. So I'll go ahead and do this for all 4 plugs and clip back on each of the coil packs. Next is to reinstall the bolts that hold down each of the coil packs. Again, be careful not to over tighten these bolts. And once that's done, plug the wiring harness back onto each of the coil packs. Now it's been a couple of minutes, so I'll go ahead and check the oil level, and it looks like it needs to be topped up a little bit. Lastly is to change out the air filter, so I'll first remove the hose clamp on the main air filter intake pipe and unplug the mass airflow sensor. Then I'll go ahead and unclip the 2 clips at the front of the airbox and press off the air intake pipe at the back. Removing this pipe makes it just a little bit easier to lift the top of the box and remove the old air filter. I'm also going to have a quick look inside the airbox to check it's all clean. And this one looks pretty clean, but if yours is dirty, make sure to clean it out. Once that's clean, pop in a new air filter element and close it all back up. 2 front clips, intake pipe and hose clamp, and plug in the mass airflow sensor. Now the plastic engine cover clips onto these 4 pins on the engine, so you basically need to line up these 4 grommets and clip it down. I also like to dab a little bit of rubber grease on the grommet so that it clips in a little bit easier. Also, don't forget to clip the rubber pipe back onto the front of the airbox. And that's it. Now we need to start it up, check that the oil light goes out, let it idle for a few minutes, turn it off and check for any oil leaks at the drain plug and the oil filter. It's also a good idea to wait a few minutes and then check the oil level once again. Sometimes it will drop a little bit as the oil filter fills up. I'm pretty sure if you've watched this video, you are going to be interested in some of the other DIY videos that I've got on the channel, so please be sure to go check those out. And if you found the video useful, please give it a thumbs up, leave us a comment and let us know what you think. Thank you very much for watching, and you'll see me in the next one. Cheers.